Hi, folks. Roage. Still in the woodshed. It's Wednesday, the 28th of November. Wednesday is Anything Can Happen Day. Now, the officials are milling around because apparently all the intimidation and stuff isn't working. All right. So, technically, and they haven't really figured out who I am yet and what they've done, but I'm going to use this video to actually explain to you folks, in hopefully in ways that you guys understand that, I'm not asking for anything unreasonable here, and I'm not doing anything weird, and, I know there's a lot of people out there that think I'm a malcontent or some sort of goofball that's stupid. But I'm going to show you that what I really asked for was actually pretty reasonable. And not only that, but if I'm asking for it, I think most of the people in this on this planet should be asking the same questions. All right, and it's my responsibility to do this, and it's your responsibility too. Okay, and it's nobody else's responsibility but yourself. But if you just sit there, excuse me, if you just sit there and just let everything happen to you, then you deserve what you get. Well, I stopped doing that. Okay, so, and I would think that it's probably in all your best interest to stop doing that too. Okay, so technically, I come amongst you as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Yeah, yeah. All right. So back in April of this year, 2012, that's the year that we all know of, okay? An agent from this entity called the Internal Revenue Service handed me a contract. Okay, now I know it's an entity of fiction, okay, because it is Internal Revenue Service. Okay, and see, if you look now, there's a big difference between the U.S. Post Office and the U.S. Postal Service. One of them is a corporation, a entity of fiction, a corporation or a dead body or a vehicle, a dead vessel or vehicle of commerce. Okay, so there's these other services out there, like the U.S. Marshals is not the same thing as the U.S. Marshal Service. One of them's an entity of fiction. And when I say fiction, I mean like the Easter Bunny. All right, so some agent who said he works for the Easter Bunny decided to give me a contract. So it was called a notice of levy. Sounds really important, right? Had some numbers on that, and they said that I owed the Easter Bunny some money. Okay, and I said, I've never met the Easter Bunny, so if he says so, that's fine. So I read the contract that the agent for the Easter Bunny actually gave me. And we get into habit. They give us a stack of papers and stuff, and we just put our name on it and we agree to it, and then we can't figure out why our lives are crap. But I stopped doing that. So that now when people hand me a piece of paper, I actually read it. So I looked at it and I said, they're talking about this entity, and it apparently applies to this entity. And I don't know if that entity's me, okay? Because they make some statements on there, obligated and required, and I just not obligated or required, and certainly not to the Easter Bunny. So I read the back of it, and there was all these citations from these things called code, right? Like the USC, right? The United States Code and the IRS Code, and it was all these little tidbits and excerpts, and it was just all of these citations and stuff like that, and it looked like code. It was like encrypted, and it didn't come with a secret decoder ring, so I couldn't make sense of any of it. I believe the proper term for stuff that's completely lumped together and thrown together is called gibberish by a guy who was an alchemist who intentionally documented his alchemical processes such that people who weren't in the know couldn't understand what it was that he was talking about. And this is what they do to what they call law, and what I know of as statute or color of law, and stuff that comes from what's called legal positivism. And anytime you hear legal, as anytime you hear that word, just substitute the word bull crap, because that's what legal is. It has nothing to do with real law. It's color of law, right? Color of law, a fiction of law. It means it's not true. So I really stopped dealing with fictions of law, and I thought, well, the only thing I could be truly bound to is the law. And, since I know what that is, and I show other people, what that is and the difference, my life has actually gotten pretty good, a lot more pleasant than what it was before. So I read this thing and I marked it up. I says, well, what does that mean? And what are you referring to here? And, and what does that mean? And who is this guy that you're referring to? And show me, help me understand what it is that you want me to do here. Okay. So I basically said the contract wasn't accepted. Because, if I don't see it's my responsibility to know the terms and conditions of any contract that I've willingly agreed to. I have to be provided the reasonable means of determining what contracts that I'm willingly going to bind myself to. Now, if I don't, then that's my problem. Right? So I recognize that, hey, this guy was speaking a language I didn't understand. Okay? And I've done a lot of research into this stuff. And I don't, apparently it's not for people to really understand, because if you did understand, then you'd probably be pissed. And most people that do understand are actually kind of an agitated bunch. But you know what? I don't want to create an outrage, and I think it's well within my right to say, hey, look, if you're going to hand me a contract, or if you're going to claim an authority, then you're going to establish that authority in a way that I can understand, or you don't have it. That's my right. Not only that, but there's this thing called a jurisdiction, right? And see, you can't just come up to me and say, hey, you're in my jurisdiction. See, I have to willingly place myself in that jurisdiction. And you know why? You know what? And it's a simple trick what they do. It's like coming up to a little kid, right? And you go up to the little kid and you tell the little kid, he's probably 3 or 4 years old, just learned how to talk. And they look down at the little kid and you say, hey, little kid, would you like to be my slave for your whole life? And the little kid looks up and he goes, uh-huh. Well, and then if I go and I make that kid a slave, then what have I done? I've broken the law. Because, why? He's a little kid. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what he's agreeing to. He's irresponsible. You can't hold him to the terms of that kind of contract that he makes with his mouth. He doesn't know that. He's incompetent. Right? So one day I stopped being incompetent, and I woke up and I learned the law, figured out what I was doing to myself, and I said, hey, this is a problem. And then, so I stopped doing it. And not only that, but I took great pains to actually tell everybody, including all of the other people that were working, as agents for the government and other things. I took the time to actually, in a courteous way, say, hey, wait a minute, I am not what I used to be. I'm not incompetent, I'm not irresponsible, and I know the law, and therefore, hey, we're going to stop playing, pretensies. Okay, we're going to play real law now, okay? And that's just the way it's going to be. All right, so I went and filed this paperwork just to tell everybody what I was, and I did that a long time ago. I really didn't need to. But I didn't want to create an outrage, and I figured that hey, I have a responsibility when somebody comes up to me. Then I have a responsibility to let them know, hey, wait a minute, that the imaginary Navy game doesn't apply here. We don't play imaginary, and I don't believe in the Easter Bunny, so I'm not playing your Monopoly game. Okay, we're doing things like adults. We're all responsible here, and we're all bound to principles of real law. That's what we're playing here. And they take me where they find me. Okay? I get to decide what law I choose to be bound to. And I don't choose to be bound to fiction. I'm bound to real law. Okay? So the terms and conditions, oddly enough, for these kinds of contracts, these colorable contracts that they hand you, have some things called implied terms and conditions. Right. So one of the terms and conditions is that it abides by USC, right? U.S. code and IRS code, and probably Uniform Commercial Code or the Code of Federal Regulations, and probably some state statutes and code there that So if you accept this contract, then you accept all of that other stuff. However, if you've ever seen what's called the IRS tax code, I mean, that book is huge. And it's all cryptic, and it bounces around all over the place, and I don't think reasonable men can even follow it. And quite frankly, I don't think any of these things are actually designed for reasonable men to follow. I think it's just a way of couching whatever it is that they want, and it's just a contract, and it's unlimited on their perspective, because they can change the rules anytime. And in fact, when they write this code now, a lot of the guys that write this code, we call people call them senators and representatives, and the executive then signs it, and then these other guys, the judges, they determine if it's okay to do. A lot of these guys don't even read the code that they write anymore. So, if they're not reading it, probably impossible for, other people to know what's in there. Okay. And, hey, I'm simply saying, hey, wait a minute. Okay. You want me to do this? Okay. What is it exactly? And do it in terms that I can understand here. Right? Because I'm simple. Okay. If I'm going to agree to your contract, I want to know, what am I agreeing to? Reasonable, right? Okay. So I decided that, hey, time for me to actually do something, because apparently we were confused, because they said, well, if you don't accept the contract, then we're just going to do this, this, and this, and this. It says, well, if you don't accept this notice of levy, then we're going to do this, this. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. I enjoy what's called due process and remedy and recourse to fiction. You can't. I went out there and went to a lot of trouble and say, hey, you can't presume me to be bound to any colorable contracts or any contracts at all. Just because you see me there and I'm wearing clothes, and somehow you decided that, I'm your slave because I've voluntarily done that. I said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And it's okay for me to do that, because it's my right to do that. It's your right, too, when you decide you're going to do that. But a lot of people just haven't decided to do that yet. All right, so I said, okay, well, hey, if it's fair for you to go ahead and send me a contract, right, and apparently that's the law, so I'm going to use that same law. So I turned around and I typed up what was called a notice of intent. And I told them, okay, if you violate my rights, then certain things are going to happen. And when you do that, you're going to actually trigger it and technically accept the terms of the contract. And I made it pretty harsh. There was huge penalties for violating my rights, because, see, I wanted to speak to somebody there. I wanted to talk to an attorney because I was with a company and these people were incompetent, and they required somebody to interpret the law for them because they needed somebody to do that for them because they were incompetent. See, they were still little kids, and see, I don't want to hurt little kids, so I said, well, let me talk to their parents. I'll talk to their parents, and we'll get that straightened out. I mean, I'm not going to go and spank them because, just because they're bad. I'll just talk to their parents. I'll let their parents take care of it. And I told them, I asked the company officials, hey, let me talk to your legal team, and they said, well, we don't have one. Oh, and then, I said, okay. I said, well, you're going to make a mistake. So on Friday the 13th of April, their lucky day, I, in the presence of two competent witnesses, served them with my contract and my notice of intent in a lawful presentment. So they had it. And in fact, it went to the agents of the IRS because they responded. And how do I know they responded? Because I met with two agents of the U.S. Treasury. And the first guy said to me, Mr. Poole, we will in no way violate your rights. And I said, I appreciate that. Thank you a lot. And then, we started talking about it, and I told him what was going on, and, I demonstrated that I did know the law, and I told him, you read the notice of intent, and he said, yeah, and then he made it a point to tell me that, the Treasury has no business with the IRS, although later, strangely enough, the Treasury agents were actually working with the IRS. So when he said he didn't have any business to do with that, unfortunately, his actions demonstrated otherwise. So I'm afraid Treasury and the federal government is actually bound to the notice of intent, and it's going to be enforced that way in law. Okay, and it's not my philosophy. Okay, it's not my interpretation of the law. It's their interpretation of the law. Okay? Their interpretation. So if they want to tell me that, I can't do what it is that I do, then they have a big problem. Because then they don't get to do what it is that they do. Because I just did the same thing. Right? Turnabout is fair play. Okay? All right, so, all I did is I just simply used the same law that they trap you with against them. And lo and behold, wow, they accepted the deal. It's just weird here, I didn't know what the heck was going on here. Hang on. So technically what I did is I said, hey, I got this hammer. How would you like to beat yourself in the face with it, huh? Why don't you... it's fun. Yeah, go ahead. And wow, I was surprised. They actually took the hammer from my hand, and then they started beating themselves in the face. And I said, okay, I know what I'm dealing with now. But they accepted the contract. Now, see, it's not my problem now. Okay? And it's not me that's breaking the law. They are. Right? And when they decide that they want to obey the law, I'm here. I'm waiting to tell them, because technically what I did is I made the IRS, that agent, and all the people that of that organization and the people of the company, I said, how would you like to be my slave? My servant? And they said, hey, apparently no problem. Okay, well, guess what? They're not acting like my servant. That's the law. And when they decide that they're going to act like my servant, hey, then we're going to get to a place and they can reconcile their breach and everything will be okay again. But until they do that, I can't wait to talk to a judge. He's going to have a lot of fun with this. Okay? Because I'm sure there are judges out there just waiting for something like this to come along, because I've got them cold. Now, they don't have to worry about me. Okay? They have to worry about any judge that they've tricked into putting his name on some sort of warrant for my arrest. Boy, when that judge figures out that he's been tricked, boy, is he going to be pissed. Then he's going to ask me, well, what do you think we should do about it? And, I've got a pretty good plan. I got a pretty good plan. I know what we need to do about it. All right. So, what I would like to do is I would like to show you the notice of intent and explain to you exactly what it means. Okay, and I'll go through point by point so that you understand, because I use some language that's probably pretty hard for a lot of people to understand. Okay, now they should understand because they're the ones that are saying that they're enforcing the law and stuff. So they should already understand this, and their behavior suggests that they do. It's just they're between a rock and a hard place, and they're afraid of actually talking to me. And I would understand because hey, they don't know me. Of course they determined that I was a threat, and I'm not a threat. So, but they don't know. They don't know, and it's okay. They've been bad and they're ashamed. Okay, and I'm okay. I understand that. Okay, so let's see if we can fix this. So, all right, so let's go and look at the notice of intent. Okay, so let's look at the notice of intent. All right, I start by saying the language of this notice is subject to definition of terms of the being presenting it, and at no time will be assumed or presumed in any way, shape, or form to be a contract in law, nor will it be held as evidence of contract. The being presenting this notice resides in its human form, which constitutes the being's unquestionable, unalienable right and property to control, will be, for the purposes of this notice, referred to as I or me. The property under the power and control of me will be referred to, for the purposes of this notice, as my or mine. I reserve all rights, and in case of error or ambiguity in any part of this notice, remains my right and discretion to revise and amend to reconcile any misunderstanding. Any attempt to misapply or redirect my intent and meaning of any part or as a whole of this notice has no power in law and will not be sustained outside my right and definition. This notice, its content, meaning, intent, application, amendment, revision, longevity, and revocation remains in perpetuity under the sole discretion, power, and right of me and those natural law forces that flow through and to me, and are expressed by and to me under the authority of those same natural forces. Any man receiving this notice through lawful presentment will be referred for the purposes of this notice as the respondent. Okay, so what am I saying here? Okay, one, this notice on my part will not be taken as a contract. Okay, or evidence of a contract, okay, against me. The being presenting this notice, that's the thing that lives inside me, inside this flesh suit, this body, okay, and it has unalienable right. I might have said unalienable right, but it is unalienable right, and it's my property. So this body is my property, and it's nobody else's property. Okay, so then I said, well, hey, I, as that being, have rights, and I'm reserving them all. And if I've made any mistake on this notice, then it's mine to correct and nobody else's. I said, and any attempt to misapply, all right, so my intent and my meaning of this document is mine, and it's all under me. Okay, so I'm in full control of this notice of intent and who it applies to and why. Okay, so then I said, okay, I am serving this to men, right? Anybody who receives this notice is a respondent. Well, the agent of the IRS received it, the FBI, the Treasury Department, and there's a whole host of people that actually received this. So they're all respondents and they're all party. Okay, so when we go to the next page. Okay. I says, in the matter of the Form 668-W ICS mailed to representatives of the corporation known as Clear Result by the man identifying himself as Michael C. Allred, who identifies himself as a revenue officer and a service representative for the entity known as the Internal Revenue Service, I state the following matters of concern, objection, and revocation of any consent that is implied or overt as follows. Okay, so this is the revenue agent that actually sent me that contract that he wanted, that he said he was going to force on me. Okay, so the paper form identified as the form 668W W ICS will be referred to in this notice as form or the form for the purposes of reference. That just basically said it because I don't want to have to say that over time. So every time I say the form, that's what I mean. I said the form is a colorable contract offer to do business with the entity known as the Internal Revenue Service. Okay, that means if I put my signature on it, if I agree, then I'm bound to that contract. Okay. 3. For the colorable contract to have force and law, it must consist of the following lawful elements. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm making a distinction between real contract and colorable contract and identifying that form as colorable contract for which I have remedy and recourse. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm making a statement and defining what a real contract is. All right, so I said, for a colorable contract to have force in common law, it must consist of the following lawful elements. An offer. Okay, so a man has to make an offer. There has to be an acceptance by a willing party. Okay, so another man has to accept it willingly. Okay, there has to be an exchange of real consideration. And real, I mean real. Okay, Federal Reserve notes or promises aren't real. Okay, the paper's real, but the promise is not. Okay, certainly because nobody's actually honored those promises. Okay, not that I have seen so far. And there must be a meeting of the minds. Well, see, I can't have a meeting of the minds. I can have a meeting of the minds with the revenue officer, but technically the revenue officer himself was not the one that said that I was required to do this. He said he was an agent for the Internal Revenue Service. Now, I can't have a meeting of the minds with the Internal Revenue Service. All right, so there's no meeting of the minds there. There's also no real consideration because what he wanted is he wanted me to make promises to pay in the form of some fiduciary instrument. Okay, well, that's not real because the promise is not real. Okay, I mean it exists in our minds, and it could be considered a contract. But you know what? I'm not going to enter into that promise, against my will. And the acceptance, of course, has to be from a willing party. Well, I haven't indicated that I was willing. Right? So there's no contract enforceability there in that form. Okay. All right. So. Now we go to the next page. Okay. Hang on just a second here. I says, for a contract to have force, it must possess and abide the following principles in common law. Now, I use common law because it's something that they might understand, but, it includes natural law also because this is not foreign. This is not special. Okay, the contract law is contract law. I said A, the contract must be entered into willingly. Okay, so I can't be forced to the terms of the contract. Okay, I have to enter into it willingly. Okay, and I'm not doing that. All right. I said the parties entering into the contract are responsible under the strict liability principle, commonly known as buyer beware or the Latin caveat emptor. That means I am responsible for knowing what terms and conditions I'm entering into. Okay, so it's my responsibility to ask. Okay, and technically, this actually come about from the fact that hey, I'm asking. Right, I'm just simply asking. I don't understand. I don't understand what it is that you're asking for, and your document didn't actually reveal anything meaningful to me. So I'm asking, and it's my right to both ask and expect it under the law. All right. So, I say all parties to the contract must have the reasonable means of discovering all terms and conditions and considerations stipulated in the and implied by the contract. That means I have to. What are we talking about here? Right? I want to know all of the things that we're agreeing to here. Okay, and I mean all of them. All right, because I'm not just going to say okay if I don't know what it is that I'm agreeing to. And so far, their code is confusing. It's hard to understand intentionally. And, quite frankly, I'm done agreeing to something that I don't understand. Okay? All parties must be competent and capable of assuming the responsibility in the performance of the contract and be accountable for any breach of said contract. Okay, so what I'm saying is, hey, you can't enter into the contract if you're incompetent. Well, one of the ways that I look at somebody being incompetent is, hey, if I hand you a hammer and you start beating yourself in the face with it, okay, you're out of your mind. All right, so I can't expect you to be bound to the terms of the contract. Not only that, but because the Internal Revenue Service doesn't have a mind of its own, okay, then it's technically incompetent. Why? Because it can't exercise any responsibility. If the IRS injures me, who do I go to for that? Right? They basically say, oh, well, it was the IRS's fault. And it's like, oh, well, it's like saying, oh, well, we didn't do it. It was the Easter Bunny. Go talk to the Easter Bunny. And if I talk to the Easter Bunny, of course, then what have I done? I've just told everybody that, hey, I'm insane and incompetent. And somebody needs to take care of me. All right. So that's why it's important that all parties to a real contract be responsible. Well, what they've done is for the most part they treat everybody as incompetent, so therefore real contract doesn't have force in law. So what we get is what's called colorable contract, right? Because real contract doesn't apply to people who are incompetent, right? So they create imaginary contracts that they say, oh, well, if you believe in the Easter Bunny, then we're gonna then you'll believe in imaginary contracts too. So that and that's how they do that. It says if any part of a contract is colorable, then the entire contract is colorable, as any mixing of fiction and that which is real renders the contract or agreement entirely fiction. All right, well, what that means is, like say for instance, you have a contract where you say, well, I would like you to paint my house, and I'll give you $4, which are real $4 silver dollars. And he says, but I want you to use this magical invisible paint that you can't tell is there. Right? Well, the magical invisible paint isn't real. Right? So technically, even though it might be a contract between two people who are real, and the money that's exchanged is real, because the imaginary magic paint isn't real, then the entire contract isn't real. Because you can't take something that exists only in a man's mind, right, that's fiction, and make it real, right? So if you try to group those together, then the entire agreement is what's colorable. And in color and in the contracts that we use most of the time now, which are colorable contracts, the actual consideration in those contracts is largely what's called legal tender, and legal is not real consideration. Okay, so therefore, any contract that uses imaginary money, okay, or legal tender as consideration is therefore colorable. Okay, so you really can't make real contract with their imaginary legal tender money. Okay, so that's a big problem. Okay, because technically what you're doing is, and then the fact too is that anybody who actually who thinks themselves bound to a colorable contract or imaginary contract, of course, believes in the Easter Bunny and therefore renders themselves incompetent. Okay, and that's the law. Okay, so I've stopped doing that. Okay, I don't like to do that anymore, and I'm and these guys aren't going to make me do that anymore. Okay, so that's that situation. Okay. All right, so next page. Hang on just a second. Okay, the following principles in law also apply in matters of contract in direct relation to conduct between real and natural men, representatives and agents and of entities of color or corporations, trusts, and other natural colorable entities. Okay, and what am I saying is, these are principles in law that actually apply to imaginary entities and real things. I says this is because these principles that I'm going to state actually apply in real law, then therefore it also applies in fiction. Okay, so fiction never is more powerful than what's real. Okay, so that which exists only as a concept in my mind, I can't manifest as something real. Um, if there's a magic Easter bunny in my head, it doesn't pop out of my head and become real just because I think it is. Okay, right. So, all right, the first one of these is the created. The created is not more powerful than its creator. Okay. Specifically, entities of color exist only in the minds of men and are a creation of man's mind, so therefore have no power over men or men who create them. Additionally, a creation within one's man's mind can have no power over another man against that other man's willing acceptance or willing consent. So if you believe in the Easter bunny, hey, that's your deal. That's okay. But you cannot make your Easter bunny empowered over me unless I give you that power. Okay? And this is all about me not giving them that power. Okay, so they have a magic Easter bunny, and they want that Easter bunny to have power over me, and the only way that they're going to have power is if I give it to them, and I'm not giving it to them. Okay, so no man can be forced into a colorable jurisdiction or where the colorable contract has force or under the authority of another man or entity of color without that first man's willing, knowledgeable consent, and no entity possesses any power when perpetrated as a deception or fraud. And so what does that mean? Well, a jurisdiction is like a realm or a sphere where certain colorable law is enforceable. Okay, and you can, and it's like playing Monopoly. All right, so if you play Monopoly, there's rules to Monopoly. If you don't play by the rules, then you're not playing Monopoly. And this is a jurisdiction. However, you have every right to say, hey, I don't want to play Monopoly. Okay, because if you're going to play Monopoly, then there are certain rules to playing Monopoly. Otherwise, you're not playing Monopoly. All right, so that's what a jurisdiction is. It's just it is a sphere or a realm where certain colorable laws apply. All right, so if I don't want to play Monopoly, I don't want to play Monopoly. Okay, now and you can't force me against my will to play Monopoly. All right, so if you presume me to be playing Monopoly when I specifically do not want to play Monopoly, and you treat me like I am playing Monopoly, then that's actually a fraud or a crime. Okay, that's a false presumption. Even though it might look like I'm playing Monopoly, if I simply tell you, hey, I'm not playing Monopoly, then you know what? You don't presume me to be playing Monopoly. All right. Next page. If a man asks permission, it's assumed and presumed that he needs permission. I require no permission, and I'm under no obligation from any entity of color, and I ask no permission of any real man or entity in the conduct of my private business or purposeful affairs. Okay, what does that mean? Well, under the law, if I ask another man for permission, the law assumes that I need permission. But I'm not asking for permission, so I don't need anybody's permission. Okay? So if I do ask for permission, then I am therefore bound. Right? So that's a very basic principle. Right? Trick is, don't ask for permission. And in this, I'm not asking for permission. I'm basically telling you, no, I don't want to accept your contract. No, I'm not doing that. So, D, I says, the law cannot compel performance. A man must willingly and competently enter into a contract or willingly and competently choose to violate a principle of natural law. Force of law is manifest only to make the victim of the contractual breach or the victim of a crime by perpetrating the crime whole. What does that mean? That means, okay, the law cannot compel performance. Nothing stops you from stealing from somebody. Okay? But if you steal from somebody, there's going to be consequences. Right? Now, nobody forces you into a contract. However, if you breach your contract, then you can be forced to the terms of the contract. However, if you steal something from somebody, the victim then gets power. And he says, hey, that guy stole from me. I either want my money back or I want something else and that's acceptable to me. right? So by itself, the law says, hey, you know what? I can't force you into a contract, right? There's no force there. You have to enter into the contract willingly. And I'm not forcing you to obey the law. If you break the law, however, that's when force applies. Now, so far, I haven't broken any law here, right? Because one, I asked them, okay, if you're forcing me, you show me where I've done this. It's reasonable for me to act. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that you have power over me. Okay, you're going to demonstrate that power over me, or you don't have that power. And so far, that hasn't happened. All right. Now, E, all systems of civilized law must provide remedy and recourse to those who willingly subject themselves to that system of law. Okay, that means in any system of law, and let's go back to the monopoly example. Yeah, there are rules to monopoly. There are civilized rules. Why? Because everybody playing Monopoly has to agree to the rules. But see, I don't have to play Monopoly and you can't make me. So if I don't want to abide by your system because it's colorable or it has rules in there that I don't agree with, then I can just simply say, no, I don't want to play Monopoly. And I reserve that power. And in fact, in doing what I am doing, I'm technically doing that. I'm saying, I'm sorry, I don't want to play Monopoly. Okay? So, that's that. Next page. All men have the unlimited right to contract without interference from from any third party, real or colorable. Okay. Hey, I have the power to make any deal that I want, any contract that I want. Nobody can actually infringe on my right to make a contract. And in fact, nobody outside of a particular contract can force me, and it just goes right back to the same thing. You cannot. I have the right to contract. It is all my responsibility, and it's all in my power. And in fact, that's what they actually use against us, because we do have the power of contract, and we don't understand that it is us that are actually voluntarily giving away our power, because we're ignorantly binding ourselves to contracts that we have no business getting ourselves into. Okay, that's the law that they use to trick us. Okay, and all I did was, hey, I just handed out this particular presentment, and I says, hey, here's the deal. Right? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. A man's ignorance is the punitive mechanism by which the motivation is manifest, such that his ignorance is remedied. Because each man will have the law when he so chooses, then that therefore places the burden on the man to apprise himself sufficiently of the law and its principles. Okay, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Okay, that means I'm supposed to. It's my responsibility to know what the law is. Now, if I am ignorant of the law, then I'm going to suffer, because it's my responsibility to know the law and teach myself the law. And if I don't do that, then uncomfortable things will happen to me, and they're all my responsibility. So when the man chooses, so the burden is on the man. Okay, I'm responsible for knowing the law, and me and only me. I can't simply say, oh, well, nobody taught me the law. Well, if I need the law is there. Okay? And in every case, it just, first thing you have to do is actually take responsibility. Then, because you take responsibility, then knowing the law is just natural. Okay? It just comes naturally. All right, next page. The existence and rights of the Internal Revenue Service, if it indeed had a real mind to exercise those rights, and those representatives or agents to conduct business as they see fit on behalf of the Internal Revenue Service, provided those agents operate in accordance to the law, is not at issue. Okay? I said, well, what does that mean? Hey, and any people out there who want to play Monopoly, you just go right ahead. Okay, if you guys want to say that you're agents for the Easter Bunny, you just go right ahead. I don't have anything to say for that. I believe in freedom. If you want to do that, that's fine. You go ahead and do that. You do that. Okay? I said the substantiation of the Internal Revenue Service under the license to operate with permission of agents and representatives of the fiction known as the United States of America and the authority Internal Revenue Service under statute and public policy is not at issue. Okay, and what does that mean? I say, well, the Internal Revenue Service can say that they operate under the other fiction called the United States of America. They could say that, and hey, I'm not trying to limit that. If they want to claim authority under the United States of America, they can. They can. That's not an issue. I say the code requiring a person, quote unquote, or a U.S. citizen, quote unquote, to be obligated to discharge their debt to the Internal Revenue Service and the United States of America is not an issue. Hey, if you want to consider yourself a person or a U.S. citizen, okay, and you don't know what those things mean, okay, and guess what? They don't use the same language that you'd use. Those things have very specific meanings, and guess what? If most of you knew what those things were, most of you would not want to be those things. Okay? Because they're dead corporate vessels that have no rights. And if you want to place yourself in those dead, powerless corporate vessels, then you just go right ahead. And if you feel that you're obligated to another dead corporate vessel, then you just go ahead and do that. Okay? So if you guys feel that you're obligated to the Easter Bunny, hey, I got nothing to say for that. I got nothing to say about that at all. Okay, so I basically say, hey, freedom's freedom. If you want to do all of that stuff, you just go right ahead. Right? Just, I'm not part of it. You just go ahead and do all of that yourself. I says, now what is at issue with regard to the form and Internal Revenue Service in general is as follows. The definition of U.S. citizen person and the colorable entity known to men as the United States of America have no substantive complementary definition in natural law and therefore have no substantive power over any real natural man against his willing or ignorant consent. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that means, okay, I didn't define what a U.S. citizen is, and I don't define what person is in their code. Okay? However, they did. Okay? And as far as I'm concerned, a person or a U.S. citizen has no rights and powers, and they've voluntarily given that away. Okay? But because I have specifically not identified myself as one of those things and specifically said that, hey, I am not one of those things and you can't make me one of those things, then therefore their code, right, and their power doesn't extend to what I am. Okay? All right. So next page. There has been no lawful continuity of the entity known to men as the Republic of these United States since its lawful dissolution by those with the power to do so in March of 1861. Therefore, the creation of the colorable entity known as the United States of America, all capital letters, in 1871 through the Act of 1871, and the new nation created in 1913 known as New Columbia as an agent for the United States of America, lacks all power against those who choose not to be party to that contract by their willing consent. Therefore, any subsidiary corporation created in color under the authority of these parent entities also lacks substantive power under natural common law of which the Internal Revenue Service claims the authority to operate. So what does that mean? Okay, well, there is a lot of question as to if the Republic is actually still there. Now, as I understand it, it hasn't been there since 1861. Okay, and what's in its place is something else. All right, and it's a different entity. Now, I'm not going to just simply assume that they're the same things, because they're not. Okay, one, I can tell that they're not because one does not behave like the other one did. Okay, so until this new one actually starts behaving like the old one did, then I might consider them to be the same entities. But so far, nobody has actually explicitly created the chain of lawful authority between the old republic of these United States that was done by the consent of the people and these new entities that apparently are not operating by the consent of the people. And it's more than just apparently, they are not operating by the consent of the people. I know that, otherwise I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in right now. All I see is force to be compelled to something that no, I don't agree with, and it is against my consent. Okay. 3, at no time have the elements and principles of real contract been met that obligate me or my property as any consideration, nor am I subject to the control and condition of any real or perceived contract. Okay, I don't see where I agreed to anything. Certainly not at a time where I was responsible and consenting. So I'm asking the question, okay, I don't remember doing this. If you have evidence to prove that, hey, I'm all ears. You go ahead and do that. You go ahead and prove that to me. But so far, I have done everything to let you know that those contracts don't exist. I took the trouble. I took the time to do this. Okay? So the onus is not on me. The burden of proof is on those that claim that and presume me to be bound to contract. Not my problem. Okay. Next page. The presumption that past action could be construed as demonstration that a contract exists must be weighed against the following. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, so this goes to a principle in contract where it says it's sort of like this. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. So what they do is they look at us and they say, well, he looks like he's performing and obedient to our contract, so therefore we're going to presume him bound, and under law we can do that because it looks like he's agreed to the terms of the contract. Okay? Well, that's all fine and nice, except when I specifically say, hey, you do not get to make that presumption, even though it may appear that I am bound to the contract, meaning that, hey, I'm wearing clothes. That doesn't mean that I'm willingly bound to your contract, because I have taken the trouble to explicitly tell people, hey, I am not bound to your contract. Okay? And I take great pains in making sure that everybody around me is protected, and those that know me, that's had any kind of relationship to me, they know I don't believe in the Easter Bunny, and I don't engage in any colorable contracts. And I tell everybody that I meet that. And that included all of the people at the company that I work for too, right? And through this presentment right now, I'm doing that again. Okay, so I was not presented with the reasonable means by which I could discern the terms, conditions, and consideration of the contract for which I am presumed to be bound. Okay, so what I said was, okay, you say that I'm bound to contract. However, you have to show me I didn't have the reasonable means to know that that contract existed. Well, we call that adhesion. That just says, hey, if you're brushing your teeth and your teeth are clean, then that means you're using our toothpaste. So therefore, you are our slave. Okay. That doesn't work if I say, hey, man, even though my teeth are clean, I'm not your slave. And even though I'm using your toothpaste, doesn't mean I'm your slave either. All right? So, and then B, there is and cannot be a true meeting of the minds between me and any entity of color, as colorable entities lack the power of self-awareness, responsibility, accountability, or will to act on its own behalf, nor does an entity of color possess any substantive power even to lawfully authorize any agent or representatives to act on the colorable entity's behalf. Okay? That means, okay, I cannot have a meeting of the minds with the Easter Bunny. The Easter Bunny is not real. Okay? Entities of color lack power or self-awareness. Why? They have no mind. They're not real. They're not separate entities that can act on their own, right? And of course, they're not responsible, so they can't be the other side of a real contract or any. And then, if you want to say a colorable contract exists, that's a lot of hooey that you have to accept in order for that to even be true. It says they don't have any accountability. What am I going to do? I mean, I'm going to blame the Easter Bunny? What's the Easter Bunny going to do? Nothing. It exists in somebody's mind. And I don't care if everybody in the country believes the Easter Bunny exists. The Easter Bunny still doesn't have a mind of its own. And anybody who actually acts on the behalf of the Easter Bunny cannot demonstrate that the Easter Bunny actually authorized them to do that. They can't prove it. So if they can't prove it, as far as I'm concerned, they don't have it. Again, these things are not my problem. Okay, next page. An agent or representative for and of any fiction lacks the substantive power in natural law to make contract for any entity of color, as the agent's mind and fictional mind of the entity of an entity of color cannot be joined in substantive lawful agreement or contract. Again, this is the same thing. Okay, Easter Bunny, a agent who says he's working for the Easter Bunny, right, can't prove that he can make contract on behalf of the Easter Bunny. He can't prove that, and if he can't prove that, then I can simply say it doesn't exist. And you have to take me at where I'm at, not where you're at. Now, if you want to believe the Easter Bunny can make contracts, then you just go right ahead and do that. However, I'm not going to treat you as competent because, as far as I'm concerned, you're insane. D. Any man who claims to be an agent or representative of any entity of color deceives only himself and renders himself insane and incompetent under natural law, and therefore remands himself by his willing consent to be insane and subject to the de facto prevailing authority, which is me, and the natural forces through which all power flows. Now, if you're going to say that you are that you act on the behalf of a entity of color, I'm going to say you've lost your mind, so I'm going to take care of you. Right? I have a responsibility to take care of you because you told me that the Easter Bunny is telling you what to do. All right? Now, I don't let the Easter Bunny tell me what to do, so therefore I have the responsibility to take care of you. Okay, you have rendered yourself incompetent and therefore not responsible, and people who are not responsible do not exercise rights and do not exercise power. That's just the way it is. That's the law. I'm sorry, I didn't come up with this. All right? This is just the way it is. All right? All right, next page. The form, and I'm referring back to that form that they sent me, indicates a debt is owed in colorable and denominational legal tender by a fictional and colorable entity identified as Roger Kent Poole, all capital letters, without evidence of contract, and I accept no terms of any colorable contract, as it remains my right to exercise my remedy at any time at my choosing, and further converts the form into a colorable state whereby it remains under my power to dismiss. Okay, that's where they go and say, hey, we've got this colorable contract, and it applies to this fictional entity called Roger Kent Poole. Okay, and I say, well, I'm not that fictional entity, and that colorable contract doesn't have any power over me, so I can just say, no, thank you. And I did. No, thank you. I do not want to enter into your colorable contract. All right, so I said no. If you want to come up with something real, and if you want to be a real man, and you want to contract with me correctly, then we're going to follow the law. Not my law, the law that gave you and the entities and the agents that work for these fictions, that's the same law. If you want to follow the law, that's what we're going to do. All right? And I'm not going to engage in criminality or lawlessness. That's just, you can't make me. Okay? All, and I mean everyone, all right, everyone out there, All will now accept that my right to remedy myself from any colorable fiction has been exercised at my exclusive discretion. Now, that is me basically saying, all right, I now remedy myself from any colorable fiction. I basically says, no, we're not going to play the imaginary games here. We're going to play the real game now. Okay? That means that you have to abide by the law, not code, and I don't accept it. So now we're going to abide by real law. All right. Now I said the form contains no reference or evidence to any substantive lawful judgment by any lawful authority within any lawful venue or within any lawful jurisdiction into which I have willingly chosen to place myself within, and therefore the form, it has no lawful power and is not recognized by me as having lawful power or force in law. Meaning that the form that you handed me is all color. It has no force in law. You guys don't have me at a crime, so therefore I don't have to act in any way to actually make anybody whole because I haven't created a victim. I simply say, hey, look, I'm not playing Monopoly anymore, and that's it. And because the Monopoly rules don't apply to me as a real man, whenever I decide I'm going to stop playing Monopoly, then I don't have to obey those rules. So I simply dismissed their fictions. And since they don't have me at a crime, okay, then a real crime, then they have no power to do anything to me. Well, they can do something for me, but everything that they do is a criminal act. Okay? So I don't stop them from committing a crime. I just simply say, hey, you do not have the lawful authority, so that anything that you do with the presumption that you have the lawful authority is technically a crime. And therefore, I get to be made whole because now you've made me a victim of your crime. And you have willingly done that. I said, H, next page. H, I do not consent or agree to bind myself to any term or condition, overt or implied, and any presumption otherwise constitutes a criminal fraud of which I do not grant license. And what does that mean? No one is permitted to presume me to be bound by contract because it's against my will. And it is a fraud to presume me to be bound to a contract. It is a fraud. If you tell people and act like there's a contract in place, I have just told you that you do not have my permission to do that. Okay? The alleged signature is colorable and does in no way create joinder between the colorable entity, Michael C. Allred, and any real entity with substantive power under natural law. Well, see, the entity called Michael C. Allred, all capital letters, is itself a fiction. So what they do is they create these fictions to absolve themselves from responsibility. So I say, okay, if that real man, Michael C. Allred, is doing anything, then he can't act through the fictional entity called Michael C. Allred. If he wants to meet me on the street and talk to me and do whatever it is that he wants to do, shoot, I'll do that. But I never met Michael C. Allred, and technically the fictional entity that he's masquerading as far as I'm concerned, has no, well, as far as the law is concerned, has no real power. Okay, the wording contained within the form lacks any substantive continuity, context, or comprehensible validity to any man who is not insane and incompetent. All right, so I looked at the back of the contract. I tried to understand the words, and they were gibberish, and they were meant to be gibberish. And anybody who says they can make sense of that, okay, is out of their mind. And since I'm not out of my mind, it doesn't make sense to me. And although there might be a, million-page document where it does make sense if you follow the twisted tale, I'm not privy to that. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect me to go through and chase through your intentionally constructed, labyrinth to know what it is that you want me to do, because it is not reasonable. So if you're going to hand me a piece of paper, and you want me to bind myself to that contract, it better make sense to me, or I just refuse the contract, and you can't force me into it. Okay, the issuance itself of the form constitutes an annoyance, and any similar document issued in the future will be treated as a criminal act. Oh, which was kind of interesting because Treasury actually set up another meeting with another revenue agent, and guess what he did? He sent me a summons to appear. Well, technically, he just broke this law. I said if he gives me any more of this fictional garbage, and that's what it was, I read the thing, then that was a criminal act. So therefore, that man, this new man, I believe his name is Ronald Forrester, he just committed a crime. And because all of these agents are therefore conspiring to represent this fictional entity called the IRS, he can't say he's not aware of this notice of intent. And I know darn well that they got it because I talked to Treasury agents very, very shortly after that following Tuesday, after I served them this presentment. All of a sudden, they show up to talk to me. Well, guess what? They didn't. I asked very specifically if that first agent had read the notice of intent, and he said he had. Therefore, he is bound. And it couldn't have gotten to him without going through the IRS, so therefore they and every single one of those agents are bound. Sorry, can't help it. Not my law. It's the law. And if they have power through that law, then I have power through that law. I didn't make myself a criminal. I simply asked the question. They were the ones that actually made themselves. They're the ones that committed a fraud. They're the ones that committed a criminal act. And I'm wondering, well, when are you guys going to start obeying the law? All right, next page. Even under the statute, the form lacks the required elements that obligate any who ignorantly place themselves in a colorable office any requirement to respond. Okay, so here's the thing. There's even under procedure, the form lacks the required elements. And what am I talking about? Well, it doesn't have an OMB number. So let's just say, for instance, just for the sake of argument, that I do consider myself a citizen or subject. Well, guess what? I'm only required to respond to stuff that has a valid OMB number, and that document didn't have a valid OMB number. It wasn't signed by a judge, and it wasn't signed by anybody who actually had lawful authority to demand anything from me. So I wasn't required to respond at all. Right? If you're going to take something from me, or if you're going to expect me to respond, then it'll be after a jury of 12 people thinks I'm required to do that, and it'll be as a function of what they've determined, and with a signature of a judge who has the authority of the jury to actually act to make me do something, or obligate me to give something up. And that form had none of that. It was just some guy on a word processor, as far as I'm concerned. They just typed a piece of paper up, just like I did here, and said, oh, well, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. But the difference between my form and his form is my form actually cites real law. His form was all in color. Mine's actually real because it's a statement of real law. So therefore, it has real force in law. His does not. I didn't accept his. They accepted mine. Okay, so it says, M, I do not, will not, and have not accepted joinder between me and any entity of color, even if it appears that I have done so, as that is an appearance only, meaning that just because it looks like I have accepted joinder doesn't mean that you're going to presume me joined to an entity of fiction. Why? Because I just said it right here. You do not assume me or presume me to be an Easter bunny, subject to your magic law, your colorable fictional law. All right, and the colorable entity, identified as Roger Kent Poole, all capital letters, in the form has no substantive definition, and its creation was accomplished without my consent, and its perceived existence remain completely and entirely within the minds of men ignorant enough to entertain such insane notions, and I am under no obligation and cannot be held substantively liable, nor do I accept liability for any alleged act of any colorable entity. Now, since they referred to the entity, Roger Kent Poole, all capital letters, and since their law only applies to fictional entities, and I said I am not a fictional entity, so therefore whatever you said on that form isn't actually referred to me. So therefore, that entity wasn't my creation. It was a creation of somebody else, and that was created without my consent, and right now against my will. So if you're going to use that magical entity, that's all your deal. You can't put that on me. And I'm not liable for anything that you created in your own mind. Even though you might think that way, that's just simply insanity. And, I would suggest that you don't want to do that. But you know what? Hey, people don't listen. All right, next page. Any alleged participation in any alleged colorable system that provides a free and open alternative such that a lawful comportment of my affairs can be achieved does not exist currently in my experience, and any alleged participation will be viewed as against my will and places me in a state of duress, and therefore cannot be considered as contractually binding. If an acceptable alternative is provided for, then all concerned are at the liberty to provide me with that knowledge. Now, the Treasury agents, when I met with them after I served this, basically told me that the current system does not provide remedy and recourse or due process of law. And I said, wow, any colorable system must provide remedy and recourse to the law, and they are required to tell me what that is. So I said, okay, if you think I'm playing Monopoly, then you're going to show me how I can quit the game. And since I haven't been able to discover it, and you're the ones running the system, then you're going to show me how I escape. Because you can't make me do this without providing me remedy and recourse. Even though you say it doesn't exist, well, guess what? I can't be in a system like that. It's not possible for me to do that. It's just not possible. I'm a real man. I have remedy and recourse to fiction. I enjoy it as what I am, as a real being inside this flesh suit. I have those rights. And if you say your system doesn't provide that, then I am not in your system. You defined it. I didn't. If you want to obey the law, hey, go ahead. I said, my acceptance of colorable promises to pay through any debt-based legal tender has therefore been subject to the exercise of my remedy. What does that mean? It says, I'm dealing with people who have confused themselves that actually think that legal tender is real. Since I don't want to injure people who think that is real, right? I'll say, okay, all right. You think that's real. All right. I'm here to take care of you. That's my function. So that's what I do. That doesn't mean I'm bound to your contract. That just simply means that, hey, you don't know any better, and that's okay. Next page. It says, as remedy is established, okay, now what I'm saying is this document establishes my remedy, okay, and Magic Easter Bunny fictional systems don't tell sane people what to do, okay. I says, as my remedy is established, my recourse to any who would deprive me of my rights, power, or recourse will become manifest when any of the following qualifying offenses occurs. This is where I set up the offer. I say, if you are going to deprive me of my recourse or my rights and powers, then this is what's going to happen. And I did not force them to accept this. They did. I said any attempt or act by anyone, any entity, or any agent to redirect colorable tender used in lieu of true lawful consideration for my time and labor to themselves or any third party or principal with the expressed intent of discharging any alleged colorable debt. Okay, so if you even attempt to redirect, right, colorable tender that I took voluntarily because the insane Twinkies that I was dealing with didn't know any better. I said, hey, you can pay me with colorable money, provided you don't try to try to do anything to me. Okay, and they actually did something to me, so technically the deal's off. All right, so I said, hey, I'll take your magic tokens, as long as you don't mess with me, as long as it's okay. I'll play along with your pretend game. I'm not playing Monopoly, but hey, you don't know any better, and it doesn't apparently seem to be any other game, any other way. So technically, I say, hey, I'll go along with what you're doing. However, I'm still going to be protected. Right? So any attempt by anyone, okay, or any agent to redirect, meaning that if you take what I was willing to accept in lieu of real consideration, meaning that, okay, I'm giving away my labor, not because you're handing me magic tokens, but because I am here and I have a function. And that function is really none of their business anyway, because technically what I do is I teach people the law. That is my function. So I am installed in a bunch of Twinkies, and I teach them the law. And how do I do that? Well, through things just like this. Okay, exactly what happened. That was my function. However, nobody goes and says, hey, well, I'm going to take this, because it's colorable and it's my right to do that. No, it is not your right, because you're insane. You're incompetent, and insane people don't tell sane people what to do. Sorry. All right. So any attempt or act by anyone or any entity or any agent to defraud me, either by referencing statute, code, or any other entity derived out of legal positivism. This is where I say, if you attempt to defraud me, meaning that if you attempt to make your colorable code real law, then you accept this actually triggers my remedy. Okay, so that's it. I say, okay, I enjoy remedy if you do any of these things. Okay, so now I continue. Next page. Any attempt or act by anyone or any entity or any agent to mischaracterize or misrepresent my being, conduct, or character into an entity subject to color, fictions of law, or that which is derived out of legal positivism. Okay, technically, a threat has definition in legal positivism. A threat to the government of the United States is defined very specifically as an entity of legal positivism. First thing the FBI did, and the first thing that the IRS did, is they characterized me as a threat. Therefore, they have triggered the remedy. Okay, they did that too. Right? And for any attempt or act by anyone or any entity or any agent to use this notice to validate and substantiate any colorable obligation. Okay, meaning that you will not obligate me just because I simply ask and exercise my right by presenting you this, right? This is where this is not a contract to me. This is just simply an exercise of my right, and I have the right and power to do that. Okay, 5. Any attempt or act by anyone, any entity, or any agent that deprives me of remedy or recourse. If this whole process was an attempt to deprive me of remedy and recourse, guess what? You attempted to deprive me. You said you're going to play Monopoly and you don't have a choice. Not only that, but this Ronald Forrester specifically did just that. Guess what? He's triggered my remedy and recourse. Any attempt or act by anyone or any entity or any agent that deprives me of anything, right, power, or promise that I consider mine, or the rights, property, or property of those of my choosing, under my exclusive right to define, including but not limited to those members of my family, friends, and those I engage in lawful private business. Meaning that you will not, if you mess with me, or if you mess with anybody that I choose, then therefore you trigger my remedy and recourse. Okay? And they did just that. They went against my wife. Guess what? I enjoy remedy and recourse by this. Any attempt or act by anyone, any entity, or any agent to mischaracterize or misrepresent my intention, my will, intention, as a substantive crime where no real victim exists and no real contract for which I am in breach exists. What does that mean? If you say that what I do is a crime, okay, and you misrepresent my intention or will, and you say that it's a crime, or you say that I'm in breach of contract where there is no contract, then that's a fraud and triggers the remedy. Okay. Next page. All right. So now I say if you do any of those things in that list, right, then this is what happens. This is what you're agreeing to. Okay? The recourse that will be set in motion for any of the aforementioned qualifying offenses will remain as follows. I will revoke, as is my power, the license for any who owes me for my time and labor the privilege of limited liability, specifically as it pertains to the use of promissory notes, legal tender, or non-negotiable fiduciary instruments, or uses as legal tender in payment of their debt to me for my time and labor, who I rescind the aforementioned license, is at my discretion and will first be directed against the man or people directly responsible for the above named offenses. Now what does that say? I say for my whole life I've been working for these promises. Technically, what I'm saying is you must now make good on your promises. You said that you were going to pay me, so I allowed the discharge of debt. I gave you license to pay me in IOUs. And now if you engage in one of the qualifying offenses, and they did, that you now have to pay me for that. You cannot just simply promise to pay. You can't give me funny money, magic tokens. You now have to pay me for my labor. And let's start when I was 14 years old. Okay? That's a biggie. That's a biggie. And because it is for me to issue license, it's not them to issue license, because I'm the one that is actually, I'm the one that has to agree to give up my labor for an IOU. So therefore, because in that game, they weren't honoring the law, they weren't obeying the law. So technically, I say, hey, you said you were going to pay for my labor. My labor is real. So now you cough up. You produce. I sit here and I wasted my time with this, and you've given me nothing except an IOU, an obligation. So therefore I say, hey, I want to collect. I'm collecting on that obligation. Next page. The payment of debt owed to me for my time and labor will revert from the colorable denomination owed to me and will be provided as follows. The amount of real money in lawful weight and measure defined as lawful dollars. A lawful dollar will mean 371.22 grains of silver of purest achievable assayable quality and remaining useful alloy such that the total weight of the coin is one commonly and lawfully defined ounce. The lawful money will be paid within 30 days of the aforementioned qualifying offenses. Any and all perpetrators will be prosecuted according to both the law and statute to the fullest extent, such that their ignorance of the law is remedy and I am made whole. Now, I did not define the lawful dollar. They did. That definition is well known. When they don't specify that they're talking colorable money, I can presume them to mean real money. I have the right and power of presumption just like they do. Turnabout's fair play. And since they triggered this agreement by their willing acceptance, because they violated my rights, I reserved my rights, and they decided to intentionally overstep it. They had and not only that, but they haven't yet. They had 30 days to actually cough it up. And they have made no attempt to do so. It's not me violating law. It is them. They're violating their own procedures. I can't help it. Not me. It's them. Okay, now, this is the summary. To simplify the summary and notice, it means if anyone seeks to deprive me of my time, labor, and fruits thereof, then they will be subject to criminal prosecution and deprivation of their possessions and property. This notice specifies why and what will occur when anyone commits any acts against my will that subjects me to an infringement of my rights. It is never my intent to act to create an outrage or in such a way that can be viewed as unreasonable by a sane and reasonable man. It is merely my intent to protect myself from the unconscious acts committed that may create injury, foremost to those who commit the acts themselves. Okay? Next page. I have a duty to notify those around me of potential danger of which I am aware and they are not, such that due care is exercised on my part in an attempt to immunize those around me from any danger, injury, or liability. Once notified, the respondent has no excuse or immunity from his actions that create a victim of me and will be held strictly liable for his actions. I, the being serving this presentment, am known to my parents as... and I'll just let you guess what that is. All right. So, here's the deal. I did not do anything except say, hey, wait a minute. If I'm your slave and I'm your servant, you have to show me how I did that. Because I can't see any place in law where I did that. And if I can't produce that evidence in my experience, then I know you can't. So I didn't do anything except simply say, hey, I have a responsibility. If you're going to say I am your servant or I am your slave, then I have the right to say, prove it. And I have the power to do that because that's the law. Why is that the law? Because that's what they do to us. So all I did was turn the law that they use against us against them. And if they want to claim that I can't do this, then they can't do what they do. Now, see, I'm not a threat to the system. I'm simply saying, hey, okay, prove it. So far, all I have seen is incompetent people who are the true threat to the system. Not me. I didn't ask for anything unreasonable. You say I have a contract, you prove it. You say I'm your servant, you prove it. You show me by what lawful authority you can tell me what to do. Because I didn't give you that. You don't have any true evidence of that. You make presumptions. And when I ask, you don't produce it. And so far they have not. Not my problem. And it's not me that's not obeying the law. I'm following the law strictly. Others are not. So what did I do? Michael C. Allred accepted this presentment. I didn't accept his, but he accepted it. At which point they were bound. They triggered it. So far, they're in breach. Not me. They are. They had every opportunity to actually discuss with me They sent treasury agents, told me that we in no way have no business with the IRS. Really? Then why are you talking to me? Well, they said, well, because they labeled you a threat and we came and investigated you. Well, why treasury agents? Why not FBI? You're not FBI, you're Treasury. And why is IRS, if you have no business with them, then why is IRS pretending that they do business with you by using your insignia and claiming that they're acting on your authority? And why do I see your agents actually acting, performing, and doing things for the IRS? Well, sorry, folks. The IRS accepted the deal. Therefore, the Treasury agents made themselves party. Treasury, their ultimate authority is the federal government of the United States. Well, guess what? They're party too. And since the FBI came and visited me, their organization is party also. Because the notice of intent said all. So anybody out there who thinks that they're going to go and, wait a minute, tell me that I'm not going to do this, or presume me to be, any of those things in the notice of intent that actually trigger that. Okay? Nobody's delivered any money to me. Not only that, but I talked to agents and said, hey, folks, I understand what the situation is. Let's see if we can come up with a different plan to solve this problem. Guess what? They did not respond. What does that mean? When they do not respond, that means they are irresponsible. People who are incompetent are irresponsible. My notices didn't go out to people to offices of fiction. They went out to the real people. And the real people didn't respond. So guess what? They are incompetent. Incompetent people do not tell sane people what to do. Sorry. That's the law. So what we're dealing with is the criminally insane. Now look, I'm not a mean man. If you're incompetent, and right now, all agents of the federal government and all subsidiary corporations, including the state of Texas, have indicated to me that they are incompetent and irresponsible. I'm not here to hurt you. However, I'm not going to sit here in the woodshed crawling around like an animal. If you are incompetent, I would be the first one to help you remedy your problem. So what they didn't realize is I held out a deal and I said, hey, how would you like to be my servant? And they accepted the deal. There's no going back on that deal, folks. Now, they want to commit a crime? They can do that. However, there was this other guy. His name was Ramses. There was a story, and I don't know the truth of the story, and I'm not going to argue that. But apparently, this guy named Ramses, there's this Moses character that came up there and said, hey, what, we don't want to be your slaves anymore. So Ramses says, oh, well, so what? And they said, well, hey, if you don't let us go, then there's going to be consequences to you and things you like. And he said, well, prove it. And it was proved to him. So here's where we're at. I'm not your servant. I'm not a servant of anybody except on. And everybody out there knows what I mean when I say on. That is the power. It decides how things operate here in this universe. And I don't care if you don't believe it. Doesn't matter. It's been 7 months. Magic number. I have been patient, right? Because I was made to be patient. On controls this, not me. However, On decides when time's up. Not me. When the agents of the IRS, the federal government, state of Texas, the FBI, and who knows who else, wants to start obeying the law, comes to me and say, Uncle, we can't get to a point where their suffering is eased. Their suffering begins and ends with me. I didn't do it. I simply said, here's a hammer. Would you like to hit yourself in the face with it? And wow, they accepted it. When all they really needed to do is point me to the legal team or a representative that could speak and speak on the behalf of the of the company, because they were incompetent. I already knew that. That's why I was there. And they specifically denied me that. So then I went to the state of Texas and said, hey, your Twinkies are creating you problems. You need to rein them in. And they said no. So therefore they weren't responsible either. So they became Twinkies. Then the FBI, right? I meet Round Rock police officers. They said, oh, well, we'll protect you. And I thought that was a really odd notion, really. I mean, maybe you don't know on, and they don't. They saw a crime being committed. They had every opportunity to actually find out what the actual real deal was. They didn't do it. Technically, they're Twinkies. Met with the FBI, met with more Treasury agents. Who knows how many people have been monitoring, my communications on the phone and email. Anybody who touched that, any tangential agent, and not only the agents of the federal government, but that includes any lawful steward responsible for the conduct of these entities of fiction and their existence. They are therefore bound by the law. And I want these folks to understand, your suffering begins and ends with me. I would suggest that it may be in your interest to make sure that nothing happens to me. Not only that, but I am not your slave. In fact, because you've rendered yourself insane, I get to tell you what to do. Now, according to Romans 13, I'm subject, as all souls are, to higher powers. I am not you. I am not a tyrant. And if you want to know what my plan is, you can watch the Prudent Husbandry video, and you can find out exactly what I'm going to put in place. Or you can just go ahead and commit your crime. And you just come back and tell me how that works for you. But don't pretend that your suffering has nothing to do with this. I was trying to help you. You're the one beating your face with a hammer. And if you want to use your fictions of law and the law to abuse people and enslave them, I can use that same law. And it is fair. One day, one way or the other, I'm going to get to a judge. And we're going to be best friends. You know why? Because it's in the judge's interest to actually help me out. Why? Because he doesn't want to have to go through what I went through. And if he deprives me of that, he knows that he's depriving himself of that. He's not going to do that. In fact, I think there are judges out there would just love for me to be dragged before him. Come on in. This is an opportunity for a good man to do a good thing. And whether that man exists or not really isn't going to matter. One way or the other. All it was an invitation to suffering, and man, did they accept it. I am not unreasonable. All I wanted were reasonable things. That's all. It wasn't too hard to understand. If I'm your slave, prove it. They haven't. 7 months, they've had plenty of opportunities. Can't help them. Time's up. So, there is a power in the universe. And quite frankly, if you knew that power like I know that power, intimately, you'd be the first ones helping me. I cannot resist that power. And this is not a dead vessel. This is filled with the spirit of that ultimate authority. And you don't violate this flesh suit. That's not what you're violating. And you're not going against my will here. You're going against the law. So that means you're going against the will of the being that has the ultimate power here. You just let me know how that works out for you. So, I'm still here in the woodshed on Wednesday, the magic day. And you know, they haven't called me. I haven't heard back from these guys. They were supposed to do something. It's time for them to do something. Because if U.S. Marshals come to get me and pick me up, that'll be the first time that I've witnessed these guys actually following proper procedure. And I welcome that. Because at some point, that procedure will get me to somebody who does have the authority over the Twinkies out there and those agencies and those agents. And when I talk to that man, who is steward for the insane, we're going to be best friends. We're going to have lots to talk about. So, I'm Roage, still in the woodshed. You have a good day.